Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. In past Hangouts, we have questioned the nature of money, debt. We had a discussion on student debt. But specifically today, we're going to be talking about a subject that many might have reacted to with the sense of, how unrealistic that sounds, such as recognizing debt as a violation to human rights. And debt is not only a relationship that is merely a point of money being owed and collected by some institutions, but there are intricacies that are imposed in a way that we often do not realize the way that it affects the reality of people, such as it has happened in the cases of Greece and the growing inequality and impoverishment, unemployment, deficiencies in the infrastructure of not only Greece, but many countries now, not only in Europe, but around the world, based on this phenomena of debt. So today we want to actually dedicate this hangout to understanding what debt is and how it is affecting the lives of the people, whereas we tend to merely see in the media the notion of Greece and its debt and how irresponsible they are and the massive amount of debt that many countries in the world have, without really looking back and asking, well, why is debt even allowed to exist in this world? Why are we not instead focusing on human rights, for example? So let's get into our discussion today with Viktor Persson. Hi, Viktor. Welcome to the Hangout.
Hello, everyone.
So Viktor joins us from Sweden, and he has been investigating the subject from the point of law, but also from the point of common sense in terms of bringing this very sometimes like out there subject, such as the troika and the imposition of debt and the debt crisis in general, down to something that we can all relate to, and also is of our interest as well within the consideration of providing a basic income, a living income as a human right. So I will remind you, the viewer, that there will be questions, comments available throughout the Hangout. And we will be talking for about 40 minutes, so please make sure that you place your comment or question throughout that time frame. And so let's start, Viktor, first of all, with a little bit of a recap or a placing ourselves into context of what we're going to be discussing, taking the example of Greece and walking it through. So what has happened in Greece?
So what has happened in Greece? I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's quite fascinating if you ask, for example, your family or a friend, someone you know that is not that into economics or world events, and you can ask them, okay, what has happened in Greece? And it's like, I don't know really. Like, they got into a lot of debt and now they have to repay it. So, and when I asked myself the question, what is it that has happened in Greece? I mean, that was kind of the same answer. Oh, well, they got into some debt and now they have to repay it. So what is interesting about the world system and economics and debt is that it's so complex. Like, there are so many relationships moving crisscross across the world. For example, debt in the United States will have a ripple and impact in Greece and Germany, and then you have this web of relationships that is very difficult to understand, and I don't think anyone really understands fully what has happened in Greece. But what we can see, at least from reading articles on the subject and such, which I have now done since I wanted to really understand what has happened there, is that there's been like a debt explosion caused by basically bad public spending, like corruption basically, bad tax system, not effectively taking in the taxes of the Greek people, and also accumulation of interest, which basically means that the interest rates on Greece's previous loans have risen like very fast, and that has crippled the possibility for them to repay. And that's basically where we are at with Greece, and that turned into this, which is now called the Greek debt crisis. Yeah, I would say that that's like the introduction to the point of what has happened.
And we tend to only see this subject within the consideration of numbers and the billions of euros that they failed to pay, for example, in 2015.
Yeah,
And, these super ideas that we usually get to see in these cases, the IMF coming with their structural adjustment programs and placing it as the solution for the people. But can these type of loans, which essentially create this public debt, be an actual solution, or is that actually a punitive measure in a way for all of the reasons that you mentioned: bad governance, corruption,
yeah,
ineffective system?
yeah. I mean, when you look at what has happened and all these so apparent respectable institutions that have gone in and apparently then analyzed the situation and created this apparent solution, like many of us tend to trust these institutions and the people working for them because, well, they are government institutions. But I mean, if you bring it back to common sense, and we can, let's for example say that you've taken a loan from your neighbor, okay, and then you invest in a house, and that house suddenly burns to the ground, and then you have no money left, okay, and then your neighbor says, okay, now you have to repay me, and you say, well, I have no money. Oh, and then the neighbor says, well, a solution is that I give you a loan so that you can repay me. And that's basically what has happened. And obviously that is not a solution. It will just keep on being in debt and be that way forever, because there is really no real money printed and going into the economy. And with real money, I mean money that is not based on debt. That is like another discussion where money comes from, but it's an important part to understand it. Yeah.
And this is also part of the discussions that, to everyone that has followed these hangouts, we have discussions on how money is debt. So I recommend watching those to also get into context as to why we say that money is debt, and therefore creating debt and providing money as debt is essentially a vicious cycle that does not provide any sort of solution. But Viktor, for example, some people say, hey, debt can be restructured, just as giving maybe certain timeframes to give it to go paying it, and this is called the restructuring of the
Yeah.
debt, and at the same time be able to still have sustainable economic growth. Is this possible? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, what like these restructuring programs entail, and that's what happened now in Greece, where because they created this major debt, and then the Troika, which is the European Union countries, some of them the member states, and then we have the European Central Bank and the Commission. They stepped in and said, well, okay, we will bail you out of this mess if you make these restructures to your economy. And that those restructuring programs is basically means that you cut a lot of spending in the economy. You cut wages, you cut pensions, public spending, health expenditure, etc. Just like to decrease the spending on the people so that more money is freed up to repay the loans. And obviously, you don't have to be an economist to understand that that will have like severe impacts on the efficiency of the economy. Like if you are a own a business, you require consumers, and those consumers are many times, or most of the times, like wage earners, maybe working for state governments, state, or being pensioners. And when their wages and pensions are slashed, that will affect in turn entrepreneurs in the economy, and it will decrease the efficiency of everything. So no, those restructuring programs cannot in any way help to solve the main problem, which is that there is debt allowed for no reason, really. Like, what is this debt? Where does it come from? Why do we require to have it? who decides where to make money, who to give it to, etc. Yeah.
Yes, so that becomes like an instrument of imposing power and control in a way that affects the lives of people, breaching human rights, which is the main topic that we will be discussing here. So some the human rights failures are considered as fiscal risks, which kind of places us into the context of how something as ruining the livelihood of someone is merely diminished to being a fiscal risk, and not really questioning, well, is this really the way forward? Is this really the way to get a country to pay or be punished for their bad governance? Where are we actually leading someone when considering that debt is more important than human rights? So
Yeah.
can you walk us a little bit on this?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like this particular phrase is actually, can find it in the Memorandum of Understanding, the recent one. And for those of you that aren't really into the vocabulary of banking and stuff like that, the Memorandum of Understanding is basically the loan agreement between the Troika and Greece. And so there was a sentence by one of the Supreme Courts, the administrative Supreme Court in Greece, I think, ruling that slashing the pensions was unconstitutional. So, not allowed, can't do that, government. And that was then referred to in the Memorandum of Understanding as a fiscal risk. And I mean, it really shows the problem, what it is, like that we place money before basic human rights, such as having a pension, which is a basic human right, like because that allows you to have a home, it allows you to do things that you would like to do in an old age. Yeah.
Then we have, of course, the imposition of austerity as a punitive measure as well, because that is what comes as a form of saying you have to now kind of tighten your belt in your economy because that will enable you to repay back. So
Yeah.
in this consideration of also what you wrote, that the consequences of separating economics from human rights is such a perversity as slavery. So can you share with us some of the examples of what has happened in Greece as a result of this debt?
Yeah, I mean, I can actually quote from the Human Rights Council. There is a independent expert called Cephas Lumina, and he did a visit Greek to sort of make a investigation there as to the effects of these programs. And he basically says that the measures have pushed the economy into recession and generally undermined the enjoyment of human rights, particularly economic, social, and cultural rights in Greece. Significantly, the public spending cuts and labor market reforms have resulted in increased unemployment, in particular among young people. And here it's quite amazing that about 60% of the youth in Greece under 24 years old, they are unemployed. And increased homelessness, poverty, social exclusion, with approximately 11% of the population living in extreme poverty, and 45% of the pensioners are under the poverty line as well. So it's interesting because just a couple of years ago, Greece was like any other Europe country, like completely functional, like Sweden almost. You went there and you sort of expected that all the people there had cool lives, and now it's just a mess.
Also, within the consideration of this, a lot is also spoken of the healthcare and how, because there were these budget cuts to hospitals, even the rising cases of AIDS or HIV returned because women could not be having these protocols of screening the babies before they essentially were identified as being infected, the return of malaria, and in essence, this whole notion of job insecurity that in essence have also led for people to flee out of Greece, and there's almost no young living population there.
Yeah.
So all of these leads us as well to ask ourselves, well, what could possibly be the kind of solutions? Is debt relief a possibility to this? And how could it be implemented?
Yeah, debt relief. I mean, if you ask, depends on how you ask, because if you ask those that own the banks, they will probably say that no, debt relief is not a solution. But if you ask the people of Greece, they will say yes, debt relief is a possibility. And it all comes back really to this notion of ownership in the world system and the competition for money, where we're all, most of us, or no, we are all in basically survival mode. And here, banks is a way for people to earn money and secure living for themselves. And they don't want to let go of loans, like debt relief, because that jeopardizes their survival in the system. So, like, as an idea, debt relief is a possibility, though to really push it through in the system, that is like another point. And that is also showed by, for example, the Syriza party in Greece, that they went into the election saying that we're not going to accept austerity measures, and that's just what they did.
There's also the opinions of great pundits on the topic, such as Thomas Piketty, who has said that we need a conference on all of Europe's debts, just like after World War II, a restructuring of all debt, not just in Greece, but in several European countries, is inevitable. And he pointed out how, for example, this was done into Germany after the World War II, based on the London Treaty. And the question comes, why cannot this be done with Greece? There has been a lot of demonstrations also around the world to drop the debt in Greece. So this is not a lunatic idea, in essence, to be able to cancel the debt and to actually support the country to get back onto their own feet. Yeah, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was in no, it's no lunatic idea. And actually, the commission in Greece, this Truth Commission on the Public Debt of Greece, they actually went through several like human rights conventions and concluded that lots of great parts of this debt could be cancelled or suspended with reference to human rights abuses. So it's not at all, and that committee was made up of professors, of debt experts, etc. So like really knowledgeable persons.
Exactly. So we see that there is a growing community that sees the common sense in it, but as long as there is still like this blind trust to institutions, organisms like the ECB or European Central Bank, the IMF, and all of these institutions that pretend to have the ultimate solution, as more and more the people of the world recognize that this is not doable, that this is insanity really, to ask the poor to pay debt. It's just like also the discussion on microloans, it's the same thing. Where you impoverish already poor people and you expect them to repay you. I mean, it's insanity in its worst form. So how can we create this respect for human rights? Because we know that, as we spoke of all the consequences that the Greek people have gone through, how can we create a solution that respects human rights, considering that the foundation of economics in itself should be the guaranteeing of human rights in consideration of the context, the environment, and so forth? So what are the solutions?
Firstly, I would like to say that what the people have done in Greece, like fighting and rebellion and things like that, we can conclude that that doesn't work because the politicians don't really give a damn. They have security officers, etc. They aren't really afraid of the public uprising. So what is required is really like political solutions that implies becoming the politicians and starting to make political decisions. And one solution that I see would make a huge difference if implemented through a law or convention between countries is making it possible to, or penalizing, for example, making certain decisions while in office. So like a personal liability for people holding important positions in the world system, because that is not existent at the moment. Like you can't, for example, sue the director of the European Central Bank for messing around with human rights, you know, because it's his position. So the position sort of protects individuals from not having to take responsibility for decisions. It's like that saying, "Oh, it's my job, it's my job." But yeah,
It's just as with corporations, in terms of how the people are protected under the banner of the corporation, and it gains all of these rights that not regular people have. For example, this is how it works.
yeah, yeah. And at corporations, when they mess around, for example, killing people because of an ineffective product, well, oh, bad publicity, and then they change the name, rebrand, and whoa, back again. So that could be, but imagine if you are a director of a corporation or minister of a country, and now you can get like life imprisonment for making a faulty decision. That would have, then you really would think through your decisions, like, am I absolutely certain about this, the consequences, etc.
What about also these debt contracts in themselves? Could they be repealed, cancelled, nullified? Could this be possible?
Yeah, yeah, like I touched upon it briefly, that this Truth Committee on the Public Debt of Greece with a guy named Eric Toussaint has been part of that process, like a really expert on debt. I recommend reading some of his book if you have the time. And in this investigation, they basically conclude that this debt contract is like contains several human rights abuses and is also not in alignment with international law, and that there is a possibility to cancel it, to suspend it, to declare it null and void. And they have also done this in Ecuador as well. And Eric Toussaint, he was actually over there and assisted Ecuador government to cancel parts of their foreign debt due to that it was illegal. Or yeah.
So we've spoken of more of the legal ways to repeal, cancel the debt. Now we can also go into the level that kind of ourselves as regular people can relate to, which means kind of questioning ourselves. Why can we not accept and allow debt to continue to be more important than the guaranteeing of human rights? So what would you say to this?
Yeah, I would say that debt is like something that suffocates life. And let me give you like a short story of debt that was really moving. It was a farmer, and he had his dairy farm. Due to certain events in the world system, the price on the dairy went down, 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 and he had taken huge loans to be able to make his dairy farm more effective and be able to continue with his farming, because that was what he really loved to do. Though because of the competition with regards to farming, etc., he had to shut down and sell his farm to repay his debt. And he said one interesting thing in when that had happened, was that the people that was cancelled out, or how do you say, pushed out of the system, was those people that were actually the best dairy farmers, that actually cared about the animals and about producing a like really cool product, but they just were not allowed into the system to do it because they didn't have any money. and all they had access to was this debt that eventually made them, that destroyed their lives, basically.
Also, a consideration of a solution is, of course, the provision of a living income, because this will enable precisely the guaranteeing of human rights, as we've spoken many times, also provide the necessary revival in the economy to make it grow instead of going into these essentially necrosis, a way of dying because there is no money in circulation. Also looking at the creation of money in a way that makes more sense, not money as debt, which comes as monetary reforms, which we had also discussed in previous hangouts. And if you can also share, I mean, there's been also within the context of the movies that are going out and looking at the topic of debt as a violation of human rights, the housing bubble that is depicted in the movie The Big Short. I
Yeah.
know you've also watched it. So this is yet another example of how the basic human right of having a place to live is simply nullified when there are these big puppets just playing with the economy that is a great fraud, the financial system that is a great fraud, and pushing people out into the streets. So can you share a little bit about your perspective on that as well?
Yeah, as you say, it's a great fraud, and the reason for that is because these people are, they're all around the world, economists, sitting and by computers, and there's like just zeros, nines, like numbers, and pressing enter, they can evict people from their homes, like destroy their possibility of creating a life for themselves. And that is insane. I mean, why have we placed such an importance on these artificial numbers on a screen and then forgotten about the real resources in life that you must have to be able to create a dignified life for yourself, such as, for example, a home?
Exactly. Housing should be a human right. And just because someone decided to make more profit out of creating these kind of bubbles, real people are just evicted, and that is what caused massive impoverishment in the US, people living in tents, up to now, where people are saying, look out for the 2016, because this might be not the year where banks are bailed out, but when the bubble actually bursts. So that is also something that, you know, I know both of, like you and I, suggest watching the movie The Big Short. Also, there's the movie 99 Homes, and there is another one that also discusses this subject, but in essence, to see how our economy is really still a belief system that has to be understood in order to be able to be debunked, just as money, just as debt. And this might sound controversial for many, but it has to be understood that we have the power to create money. Therefore, we have the power to nullify debt and to instead focus on creating money to guarantee human rights, such as to provide a living income. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's all words, basically. If you look at the basic con constitution of a law or a contract, it's words. And obviously we can simply replace those words with other words that are more supportive to us. Why do we accept the words that are here currently? They are not supportive for us.
So in essence, it's about ensuring that what we make legal, what we make lawful, is that which leads to an equal recognition of living rights, and that which ensures that there are no punitive measures imposed in the form of debt, that there are no more institutions that are deciding the future of entire countries, people's livelihood based on these structural adjustment programs and so forth, the IMF. And that comes from all of us as the people of the world understanding how the game is rigged, the system is fraudulent, it is in essence a joke that we have to take responsibility for at the same time. We cannot continue just blaming the bankers and those making the decisions at high levels, but also all of us pushing forward for this kind of solutions that can begin with something that can be as immediate as the provision of a living income, for example. So what kind of rewards can we expect from, for example, canceling the debt, providing a living income? What do we have to continue looking forward to, instead of being subsumed into this notion of, oh, we just have to pay the debt and suffer austerity. So
Yeah.
what should we aspire to?
Yeah, I mean, consider a country, a nation where there is no debt, where you have no mortgage, where you have no, where you can actually buy your car without a lease, where there is sufficient with jobs at all times. There is no unemployment because there is sufficient with money in circulation. That would be quite amazing. Like, it would remove this, because currently we all exist in this anxiety and stress because we know that the system is, to be frank, fucked up. Like, the system can decide to push you out in a moment. Unemployment. Oh, that line of work disappeared. That career is gone now. That can happen. And with a living income guaranteed and a system that creates a more affluent environment, that stress and anxiety would be gone. And we could instead start to focus on the things that are really important in life, such as, what is it that we would in fact want to contribute in this world? What is it that we're good at, that we can give? What is it that we want to develop? Would we like to go travel to other countries, learn new languages? You know, it's really, we can play around with it and look, but there's so much possibilities when we remove this strangler situation that is here now.
And this is something that we surely have to remember and remind ourselves every single time. And also, I mean, you're from Sweden, so we know that the solidity of Europe comes from having an effective democratic system and having this welfare state, and also not allowing like the deregulation of the financial sector as it happened in the US, and not imposing severe punitive amounts of debt. This was like the model that was before, I guess, the European Union. So this has, you're kind of living in a country that still has that solidity. So why have we kind of gone astray from that, or what has happened?
Yeah, well, there probably this concept of neoliberalism happened, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's like a extreme form of economic thinking where you simply deregulate, 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 and then leave everything up to basically money. So money decides. Where money is profitable and can propagate, that is where money will go to. So there's no principles in it at all. It's just like, let the money decide. And that has caused, for example, well, this banking crisis where, okay, money moved there, in there, because you can make money on these default credit swaps and creating this housing bubble, and boom. So yeah, money without principles.
Absolutely. So we have a question, and I remind our viewers that if you have questions, this is the time to place them. So this is from Rep Dalmas, and she's saying, this begs the question, how can we indenture the children that are not even born yet? Are we, in essence, enslaving a child before they are even conceived? What kinds of limitations does this bring to the child, and would each of us want that?
Yeah, no, I would say none of us would want a life in debt. Though we have become so accustomed to it that it's rarely that anyone questions debt. And it's just something we take for granted, like, okay, debt is debt, and we can't have a system without debt, though we could potentially. And it would create, as I was touched, or as I explained before, like really a completely new way of living, and also obviously then a new way for children to experience life.
Yes, because right now we're living an entire system that is based on debt, which makes absolutely no sense. I mean, debt to who? Trillions of debt. And then, you know, like the US is the most indebted nation in the world. And
Yeah.
apparently it's still a first world country or the most rich country or whatever. It just doesn't make sense at all. So we have to really get back to sanity in this world by saying, we can actually apply something like debt forgiveness, striking debt, not only for students, as we had discussed before, but also at a national level, and actually bring forth the economy into something that works for everyone, because that is what would make sense to do. So it's just bringing really common sense back into the economy. Thanks, Rebecca, for your question. So, Victor, any last comments on this topic to finalize the hangout?
Well, the last words on this would be to, if you have the time, to investigate debt and the process of money creation, because if you haven't done that before, it's like really mind-blowing when you get to see how it's done, because then suddenly you start to understand that it doesn't have to be like this. And that is also a suggestion, like to start to question things that might be seen as obvious and taken for granted, but when you look at them, it really doesn't make any sense at all.
I absolutely agree. And just as questioning debt, continuing to question and educate ourselves on the nature of money and how we give power to institutions, to laws, rules, regulations that we simply vote on or don't vote on, but because we remain silent about it, we keep the status quo as it is, while ignoring the actual suffering that people go through because we keep the system as is. So I thank you very much for this discussion, precisely to kind of open up the doors to the possibilities beyond that, to question that, and to also consider as an immediate solution the provision of a living income to places like Greece and many other nations that are undergoing the consequences of indebtedness. So thank you very much, Victor.
Yes, you're welcome.
And to all of our viewers, next week we will start throughout this year having the last weekend hangouts on Sundays, of course, dedicated to politics of self, with my co-hosts Joku, Joanna Jesus, and Kelly Posey. So please be tuned in for next Sunday, a very important subject as well, the climate debate, so to speak. So please tune in at the same time. We will be also watching there. And so thank you very much for watching today, and see you next time. Bye, Victor.
Bye.